for tuning into SLM Live, Women and the Future of Work. My name is Amanda Woytus, and I'm the Deputy Editor of St. Louis Magazine. I'm so excited today because I'm going to be in discussion with local women leaders about how COVID-19 has affected their workplaces, how they've juggled career and childcare, and any lessons that companies can learn from the global pandemic. This issue is super timely. A study released last year found that in August and September, of the 1.1 million people who left the workforce, more than 70% were women. And with a sluggish vaccine rollout in Missouri, I don't think we're going to be returning to normal anytime soon. But the great news is that we have a panel of very smart women here who have figured out a new normal. So with that, I would love to introduce my guests. Today we have Lindsey Creech, VP of Marketing and Communications at the automotive logistics and services company ACERTUS, Alisha Buelt, SVP of Global Strategy at ACERTUS, Lauren Herring, CEO of the career coaching company Impact Group, Anna Spinks, a fitness studio manager, Amy Studebaker, owner of the interior design company Amy Studebaker Design, and Christina White, owner of the Christina White Salon. Such a big thank you for my guests for being here today. We will be taking some Q&As from the audience at the end of this, so if a question pops into your head, use the Q&A chat function in Zoom. And when we're done discussing, I'll pop in there and we'll take some questions from the audience. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. I'm wondering if we can think back to March of last year when COVID-19 hit, and a lot of us began working virtually instead of in person. And I'm kind of wondering what that process was like. Alisha, do you think we could kick off with you?
Sure, absolutely. I would love to say that we had a really tight, sound plan going into that transition when COVID hit. Unfortunately, that is not what happened, at least not for ACERTUS. It was in a lot of our disaster scenario planning, a global pandemic was not really considered as one of our fallbacks that we had to go to. But ultimately, it's kind of one of those days where it's almost kind of like September 11th, right? Like it's a very vivid memory now in my mind that I probably won't forget, where we were just following the CDC updates, the St. Louis County mandates that were coming out, just trying to understand what was going on. There was still a ton of uncertainty at the very beginning of COVID as to how significant is this? Should we really be concerned? Are we blowing this up into a bigger situation than what it really is? But with all of that uncertainty, we weren't willing to kind of risk our staff's health and well-being at the end of the day. So as a leadership team, we came together and discussed what are our options. I mean, really the only option was we need to send people home and we need to figure out how to make it work. We knew that there would be some rough edges and not everything would be perfectly tight whenever we did it, but we knew that we had some weeks to make up for it and we would figure out our way as we went. And so we made the decision that day. I think if I remember correctly, I want to say it was like March 16th. And within an hour of making that decision that morning, we came out and immediately started dismissing folks. Take your equipment home. We didn't know if it was 2 weeks, 2 months, a year. I mean, I think realistically, nobody thought it was going to be a year. Everybody thought it was just going to be a couple of weeks, but obviously it's turned out to be a much more long-term situation that we're all working through. But it's been quite an evolution. I would say all in all, it was pretty successful. It was a little chaotic those first few days of that transition, but I think everybody was flexible and understood and appreciated that their safety was top of mind. And that's ultimately why we were making the decision to do what we were doing. And so I think that kind of prevailed, that mindset and that appreciation. And over the past few months, we've worked out kind of all of our operational kinks in the process where we were having some struggle points around. We just had to get a little bit more creative with our mechanisms around communication and metrics and just how our teams were managed and worked through their day-to-day. But all in all now, I would say we've kind of hit our stride and everybody's pretty well acclimated to this remote working environment, and let it be a lesson learned moving forward that this is kind of a disaster plan recovery that we need to make sure we have accounted for now moving forward.
I loved a phrase that you used, sort of like the creative ways that we've had to learn to adjust to this. And I'm wondering if we could talk about sort of adapting growing pains that we faced and sort of how we solve them. And maybe we could talk to Christina a little bit about that.
Sure. One of the first things that came to mind when we were closed longer than what we thought we were going to be is we do a ton of hair extensions. So finding a way to reach out to our clients and let them know like their hair is going to be safe. We did a ton of virtual consultations with them and made sure their extensions look good. And then we did videos on how to remove them safely at home. So that was a huge thing for us with our clients. And then for our staff, it was when we were reopening, making sure we had all the protocols in place and that they felt safe. Do you want me to go into kind of like what we were doing in the salon as well?
If you would like.
At this point.
That has to be a huge, I mean, I just can't imagine.
Yeah, so we've definitely adjusted to wearing the mask all day long, doing weekly sprays, especially like at our front desk, because that's not something that is easy to sanitize, whereas like when you're doing hair tools and things like that. So that has worked great. We haven't had any transmission between stylists and staff. We've had over 50% of our staff get COVID between all the months that we've been open. So we do feel safe. And let me just check my notes if there was anything else I wanted to add with that as well. Another thing that we've done to adapt is our clients are coming in and working on their laptops. So we have loud music. This is a very like upbeat, energetic kind of salon. So turning down the volume when they're sitting at our conference table, making sure like if they need to take a call while they're here, they can go into our private room if they have a virtual meeting or if they have to be on call. So those are kind of the things that we've adapted with. And then also with children, normally that wouldn't be we wouldn't have them in the salon just for their safety. And so it's quiet for our other clients, but we understand if they have to come in with their moms because they don't have childcare, things like that. So we've adapted.
And that's a great segue into my next question, which is the other part of this for a lot of us was securing childcare. And securing childcare during, normal times is hard enough. And this just added a whole new layer. So maybe we could hear about this from Anna.
Yeah, it definitely threw our family for a loop. I'm a mother of 4. Our kids range from I can take care of myself at home and make meals to I need assistance in almost everything. My husband and I had to sit down and try to figure out for a while, like, is it worth it for me to even work? Does it make sense for me to work and pay for childcare? What does that look like? We don't have any family here. We are not originally from St. Louis. And, when I first moved here, it was one of the things that really struck me is how close everybody in St. Louis is. They have generations of family. They have family on family. They have people who aren't family who feel like family. And it was a really beautiful thing to see. It takes a village concept to really come to life quickly. But we weren't a part of that. I have friends and I have people who are happy to support that have their own jobs and maybe have their own kids. So then the discussion turned to, okay, well, if we're in a pandemic and we're not supposed to be around people, I have this friend who's willing to help out and fill the gap, but she has 4 kids and she's going to watch her neighbor's kids. And I don't know her neighbor's kids' family and I don't know who they've been around. And it became a really big juggling act. I work for Lifetime and I'm very thankful that we were able to pivot quickly. And I was able to fill that gap. But in the interim, it was like, let's not panic. Let's think about this logically. But there was certainly a time where, okay, do I just not work? Do I just go back to homeschooling and hope that I have a job later? And what is that going to look like? When is later? To Alicia's point, is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 months? Is it now a year? What does it look like? It was not easy for somebody who's not well connected in a family way. And even the friends that I had that were connected in a family way, they had the same thought, my family knows this family, but this family's all filled up at their house. How do I fill the gap? There were times when I had some of my team members' kids come over and have play dates just so that they could teach their class here because they didn't have a fallback. But it truly, in the moment of panic, you figure it out and your friendships become stronger and your faith becomes bigger, and you look back on it and you see all this growth and all this warmth and people helping people. And it really is a magical ball of stress is what it feels like. And just seeing people be able to make decisions that have helped them in the long run, parents who felt like they were overworked that now get to connect with their family on a deeper level. The guilt that some of my full-time working mom friends had, not seeing their families as much, and even though they had to juggle it, they got to be a part of it more. So I think in any stressful situation, there's always beauty that can be found in the end. It's just a matter of being in the heart of it. Sometimes feels like water slowly rising.
Yeah, and I thinking back to last March when I thought we were just going to be away from the office for 2 weeks and then we would go back and everything would be okay. And even considering those 2 weeks when we wouldn't have childcare, I was like, oh, we're not going to make it. We can't do this. So it's just really interesting to reflect back on that time. You also mentioned mom guilt, and so I feel like we can't proceed without addressing that. And so my question is kind of, do you feel like your male counterparts at wherever you work have how do you feel that this time has been different for them?
There's been a big difference. I feel like as a world, I think, the scales have moved. There's women in the work environment. We do all the same things that men do, but things are so deeply ingrained, right, all the way back to the caveman age. They go hunt and gather, and we stay home and take care of things. And I feel like it sort of went back to that for a lot of my male counterparts, friends, my dad, who's still a father, obviously, but no longer taking care of me on that level. It was almost an anticipation of, okay, well, you're going to now take care of this, and I'm going to continue my job. And most of them, unconscious bias is a thing right now, right? And I feel like that also is in the mix. It's this unconscious expression of whatever those gender roles mean in your family. And for me and my husband makes more than I do. His job is detrimental to people's lives. He's a physician. So for us, that does make sense for him to stay in what he's doing, especially in a pandemic environment. But for some of my counterparts, the women make more is expected of them at their job. They may have a higher title. For some of them, it's equal. And I would say for those people that I experienced, it was a real paradigm shift in what the expectation was. The learning that men had to do who maybe didn't always step into that role, even trying to juggle simple things, going grocery shopping with children. What do you mean I have to do both? I have male counterparts who have never had to do that because their wives just do it. That's how their roles were divided in their family. So it was really interesting to watch. I definitely had a few male counterparts say, give me tips. How do I do X, Y, Z? How do you get this done and that done? How do you fold laundry and not have your kids dive into it like it's a pile of leaves? Simple stuff for those who do it all the time became really stressful for those who didn't. And you could see the angst, you could see the stress. And, I even had a couple men say, I'm trying not to resent my wife for doing what she does because it's not her fault. And her job is just as important as mine. And she's as much of a support financially as I am. But I find myself resenting the fact that I have to be uncomfortable in this new role. it was interesting. It was definitely a visceral feeling of stress and angst.
Has anyone else kind of like witnessed this in real life? Maybe we could hear from Lauren.
Yeah, in fact, I had some conversations recently with very high trajectory type women in their careers who personally have made the decision recently to take a step back and focus on the family. And so it's interesting because even women who are extremely career oriented are in a position right now where they're forced to think this way about, do I choose my family or my career when they are at odds? And so unfortunately, we've been placed in a position where some people are making that decision. And, Anna, it sounds like you've been able to manage that even though you confronted the question. And others are saying, I can't manage unpredictable daycare and a high stress job and everything else with the family. So the other thing that is, I think, really valuable to keep in mind is that, especially for the up and coming families, so younger generations, Gen Z for sure, probably not as many families there, but for the millennials, I think there's a lot more interest in men playing more of a role in the family. And so I think one of the things that's actually interesting from a corporate perspective also is that there's been situations where, now it's not so often that the doctor is marrying the nurse, but the doctor might be marrying the doctor to use that kind of a framework. And so there are a lot of families where both sets of wage earners are high earners and both careers are important. And so this pandemic situation has actually created a situation in corporate America that is responding to some things that were happening anyway in the generations, with interest in men actually desiring to play more of a role in their families, and where it's actually more acceptable, because right now we're just in a situation where everyone has to pitch in and figure out how to get things done. And there is more understanding in a corporate environment of, okay, yes, it's acceptable for you to go take care of your kids right now because we understand the pandemic. But I do anticipate that that will be something that will continue going forward as well, because corporate America has figured out it's okay. We've made it through.
I do think it would be such a shame if we don't come out of this like having learned anything, right? Like if we just sort of backslide to where we were. So that is a really nice segue into that study that I referenced in my intro about 72% of people who had left the workforce last fall were women. And I just kind of want to talk about, have you witnessed this in your own lives? What do you think some of the long-term effects could be, especially for St. Louis? It could be financial. It could be looking at the way, companies will be made up, maybe more of men when we kind of like pull out of this. Maybe we can talk to Lindsey.
Yeah, thank you. So I would say that pre-COVID, we already had this pipeline issue where women are entering the workforce at 50% participation. Then they start to downshift or drop out of the workforce completely when they start having kids or they get married. And as a result, we're left with, unfortunately, less women in leadership positions. I think like 7% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women, or something terrible, something close to that, something terrible. But then COVID hit. So then more women and working moms were forced out of the workforce because they're either laid off, furloughed, or they had to make this terrible decision of having to step back out of the workforce because they were trying to balance the demands of childcare and homeschooling along with work. And for many, that was unsustainable. And as a result, now we have amazing and talented women being forced to make these high impact and unprecedented decisions about their careers. And I think that the downstream effects are major. We're going to have less women in leadership positions. And when you lose that lens of diversity and that perspective of a woman at the top, you know, you don't have that kind of diverse leadership team and managing to that. And I also think that once you get out of the workforce, it's extremely hard to get back in it. There's a ton of people waiting in the wings to take those roles. And with the changing landscape, I think you can get lapsed very, very quickly. So that's a problem. And then I think for the younger generation, they want to be what they can see. And so I think it's so important that this younger generation of female professionals not only has women mentors, but also women that haven't had to give up a piece of the puzzle to be in that seat. So, and I think lastly, like one of the things that you mentioned was the McKinsey report, and the research shows that company profits and share performance are like 50% higher when women are well represented at the top. So that data is informing of the financial impact that these decisions can have. And there's many reasons to keep women engaged in the workforce, and a lot of downsides if we don't retain this critical talent. So.
And, you know, that McKinsey report had kind of two suggestions for ways to retain women. And it was, you know, one, make the work more sustainable, which I think is a really interesting term. And B, reset norms around flexibility, which I don't think any company is doing those two things right now. But, you know, thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I would say, and the women friends that I have that are working, and you know, even the ones that are not, there's this common experience of feeling like we're drowning and being pulled in opposing directions. So I think unquestionably companies need to make major programmatic changes to make it more sustainable for women, but also working mothers. And two of the ones that you said, I think were great. And, you know, evolving these outdated policies and programs and defining and encouraging flexibility. I think work is not a binary thing anymore. You don't have to be in or out. There's the rise of the gig economy, and there's freelancing, and there's, you know, this flexibility that we need to have in order to kind of maintain both. And I think a really big one for me is helping managers lead with empathy and on a more human level. I think there's this desire for a more modern approach to managing the employee as a whole versus just here's how you're professionally developing. I think now we're separated by screens, and it's hard to read body language and really understand like an employee's well-being. So checking in on them quite frequently is really important right now. And I also think there's a huge opportunity for women to use their voices. And I think we all could say we're guilty of this, but we tend to be shock absorbers. So we're just trying to absorb what's happening around us and just keep forging ahead. But speaking up and using our voice and advocating for what we need to be successful without this fear of like the impact it might have on your role or the perception it might have on you as an employee. I think having really honest conversation with your managers and your company on what you need. I think our company does a really amazing job with this, but I think our leadership team has this kind of empathetic thread. But I think if people had more honest conversations, they might be surprised with the level of understanding and flexibility that the company might provide to them. And I also think that companies need to make people feel empowered to have those conversations as well. But I think if these changes happen, it will not only retain female and working women, but it will also kind of lend itself to a variety of people and demographics, within the company that have these personal circumstances as well, not just women, men, or, you know, caretakers and things like that.
That's great. That's a great point. Anyone else want to chime in on changes they kind of hope will stick around after the pandemic ends, or any other ideas about how companies can create workplaces that are more family friendly? And maybe we could hear from Amy.
Yeah, so I think that just to kind of what we were speaking about, I really hope that we've all experienced this. It's not just St. Louis. It's not just Missouri. It's the world. It's women everywhere. It's people everywhere. And it would be a shame if after all of this that we've gone through, if we don't come out with a better understanding of how can we help others? What can we do for others? What does our family need? What do we need? But what can we do for others? And, I have, about 9 ladies on my team who I just adore. And I think for me, it's really been about that. Like, what can I do for them? How are they feeling? How are their families? What do their families need from them? But how can we support each other? And how can we just take care of each other? And for us, we've just done a lot of, okay, you need to work from home today because maybe your husband has to be at work and your kids are at home, but yeah, you can totally work remotely, and let's just be empathetic. And I really hope, and I do think, like, if we've all lived through this, which we all have, I mean, you can't go through this without being changed. And I see it from even my clients to us, that they understand, like, hey, I can't meet with you in person today. I can Zoom, and we're going to drop samples off at your door and we're going to make this happen. And so I hope that we all continue to care for each other and help each other and have understanding. Like, I think that's just a big thing that I really hope is, I've seen happening, and I hope it continues to happen.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And going back to what Lindsey was saying about that empathy, one of the things that we say in some of our leadership training that we do at Impact Group is that we're all humans first and people and employees second. And so having that ability to relate to your team members on that human level has been so critical. And yet it's something that I think most people have been able to do relatively well during the pandemic because we're all in challenging situations.
It's all of us.
Yeah, and so I really hope that is going to be something that will continue. The organizations that do not are not able to manage that more empathetic approach to their team members, I think will eventually struggle in talent retention down the road, because individuals have found the importance and the value of that, and they're going to look for that in organizations. The other thing that I anticipate that we will see more of going forward is this remote work. We're seeing it in big organizations like Facebook, even saying, hey, we'll pay you to go move to another city. By the way, we might also cut your salary as well if you're going to be moving to a lower cost of living area. But some extreme situations like that. To also, I was talking to a market leader in St. Louis recently who said their CEO prior to the pandemic was absolutely 100% firm, no remote work. It did not work in their culture, did not work in their business, industry, etc. And guess what? Over the last 9 months, 10 months, they've had to figure out how to make it work. And shockingly, or not so shockingly, it did work. And so I anticipate after this, we will see organizations that had no tolerance for remote work or flexibility, finding that that is something that people will just frankly be expecting going forward, and they're going to find ways to work around it. They might not go to that 100% remote situation like some companies will, but they will find some in-between space.
Mm-hmm. And I think this brings up an interesting question. If more jobs are opening up remotely and people in St. Louis could feasibly work, for a company on the coasts, I'm kind of wondering, how do companies kind of, local companies incentivize staying, with a St. Louis company? Like, are you all seeing any examples of that in your workplaces or in your life?
I was going to say, I'll chime in and just say that that's conversations that we've started having over the past few months, is really with this new remote work environment, we need to completely rethink kind of how we expect to retain our people, because the incentives and just overall the benefits that people are looking for from employers today is far different now than what it was, say, 5 years ago. And so I don't think that anybody's come up with the perfect science yet of exactly what that looks like, but I think that as long as companies are open to discussing how we need to change and adapt in this new environment, because I think people are living under a rock if they don't recognize that people's expectations of what they're looking for from their employer is going to start to shift. So as long as people are actively engaging in kind of some self-reflection on their organization and how they need to adapt in this new way, I think that's super, super critical, because I completely agree. This new remote work environment completely changes the landscape of where opportunities are. And you don't have to, you don't have to physically move to a different city to work for a company. And so that's a wonderful thing, because the opportunities now really are endless on what the possibilities are for everybody. But you need to really take a look at your culture and hope that you have something really great that you're holding on to and you're continuing to foster. Otherwise, your people will start looking elsewhere. And I think just being open to providing avenues for your team to provide you feedback on what they're looking for and how they're hoping the company adapts, and just be willing to absorb that and actually consume their opinion, because people just want to be heard and actually feel that their opinion matters and is applied.
Totally. I also have been kind of wondering if after all of this, it will sort of like embolden women to start their own companies. And I was wondering if we could hear from Amy and Christina about sort of like the perks and challenges of really like owning your own business during this time.
So perks are that I am the one running everything. I own the company. I can see fit to do what I feel needs to be done. And so I feel like I have control. And of course I like that, because I know that I'm the one that's taking care of my employees, and I can do that. Like I don't have to worry like, oh gosh, what is my employer going to say or do? It's just for a perk. It's just that I know that I can take care of my employees. I can guide this. I can see how they're doing and what they need. And I don't have to really worry through any of that. That would be, I think, one of the perks of that situation.
Totally. What about
Yeah,
Christina?
definitely being able to control. Yeah, definitely being able to make the decisions for yourself has been great. I might feel more comfortable coming back to work before other people, but as a leader, I have to step out there and do those things. But you have someone opening their own business during this time, I think it would be a great time, or they've had time to really think about it. But it is a big leap of faith, starting your own thing and not having your benefits or using up your savings and all of those things. People have to take that into consideration. So I think it's a big decision, and it weighs heavily, especially if you're a single person.
And I think like, being in control of everyone and getting to really take care of your employees, that also seems like it would be a pretty daunting challenge. Like you're in charge of everyone. And this is also, it's a health issue. And so we don't envy that you've had to like figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, that's been
Yeah,
a challenge.
lay everyone off.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
whenever we first closed, everyone was laid off, and we got everyone signed up for the stimulus and all that. So not knowing when you're going to come back to work, and having 26 employees that are, just waiting in the balance, and you're hoping that, they can pay their bills and all those things, and they've got enough savings. It is stressful. So it was a stressful situation.
Amy,
Yeah.
your thoughts?
Yeah, being responsible, because that is one thing I just felt. I thought, oh gosh, like I am a huge contributor in my family, and so it's like I'm helpful and responsible for my family along with my husband, but we do that together. But also the 9 other women on my team and their families and their children, and so it was like the quarantine hit, and it was like, okay, I had to go. Like I work a lot, but I went into like super work mode. Like, what can I do? What are we going to do as a team? And so it was like, all right, first, the health of employees, get them to their homes. Everybody take what you need. If you have to come into the studio, everyone needs the text to say, I'm coming, nobody else comes, sanitize when you leave. But then it was, okay, you know, how can we still help our clients? What can we do for them so that I can keep my girls working so that they can keep making money? They don't have to worry about their families and they're putting food on their table. And so, I mean, it was a challenge. And, you know, from it, we actually developed 2 new services that we're providing, which have been great. And so we utilize that time to really say, okay, like, I know this isn't what we normally do, but we're going to just do it and develop it. And I can, you know, keep them going and keep that. So it was a lot of late nights on my end. I'm thinking I'm watching all of these videos and people are like, oh, I'm watching TV all day in quarantine. I'm like, God, I wish I could watch the TV on quarantine. But I was thankful. I was thankful. I'm like, I'm so thankful that we can develop this and have new things come of this and keep my girls going and not have them worried. Like I was in a very fortunate situation with the industry that we are in, that we were able to do that, because I know not everybody could.
And I would think you would also have the challenge of, you know, your clients, you're designing their homes, which I feel like a lot of people have done a lot of work on their homes during this time, but
Right.
also it was probably pretty scary in the beginning where, you know, we're supposed to stay apart and nobody comes into your house.
Right.
So that you've been able to navigate that is really incredible.
Again, we were just very fortunate. We, you know, we build a lot of homes, and so we're on job sites. And that was just one thing that I think everything aligned perfectly. And it was just like, okay, when you're on job sites, you know, penny construction, there's no walls, you're outside. So we could be on job sites and everyone has their mask on and we're, you know, forever away and we're yelling across. But we were very fortunate in the projects that we were in. Or if we needed to go into somebody's home, instead we Zoomed, and then we would literally like, okay, your samples are on your door, they've been sanitized, and we have our own copy and we'll go over them. And so we just found creative ways to continue to make it happen. But it was definitely a challenge. There was way more thought on everything we did than we ever had to do before.
Yeah, I think you really have to when you're dealing with people one-on-one. And I certainly don't want to speak for Christina or for Amy, but I know, you know, not just being creative with your team members and your employees, but also staying relevant when you're in a people-to-people business. You know, to your point, how do you keep your people in St. Louis for St. Louis jobs, but how do you keep your clients in St. Louis for St. Louis jobs? In the fitness industry, you saw a ton of budding people. I mean, it was everywhere. You could go on any YouTube and find something fitness. So how do we stay relevant? You know, for Christina, I don't know how many hair tutorials I watch. I will never try to give myself extensions, I promise. But like, I learned how to do a ton of stuff with my hair. That became relevant for me. Do I have to go get updos anymore? Maybe not, because I saw 19 things on Instagram I can buy to make me look like that. You know, for Amy, how many people could they virtually talk to outside of somebody in St. Louis and get samples mailed to them? You know, you really do, as a business, have to think outside the box for both your team members and your customers, and stay relevant and really dive into what matters and how quickly you can pivot to meet them where they need to. Like Christina did, you know, one-on-one virtuals with everybody, and, you know, Amy screaming across the landscape to have something done. You really have to be able to find creative ways to keep everybody engaged and really truly be passionate and care on a deeper level. The people who it's all esoteric and you can find anybody anywhere, they're going to fall to the wayside. You know, to Lauren's point, like, if you don't change your business, if you don't change your model, are you still relevant?
And I think it's the double-edged sword, right? Of, you know, now that we're all Zoom pros, we can engage with, you know, anyone in the country we want to, really anyone in the world. But the problem is that anyone in the world can, you know, engage with people in St. Louis too. So it's a really interesting time. I'll be super intrigued to see how the landscape changes here once we're kind of able to be in person with everyone again. So we're at 40 minutes. Why don't we do one more question and then we'll see if anyone has dropped anything in the chat. I think this is a nice one to end with. What are sort of our roles or responsibilities for advocating, for more family-friendly workplaces and flexibility?
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, you know, being on the leadership team of my organization, I feel a lot of responsibility to voice my thoughts and opinions and try to advocate for my fellow women colleagues. I have an 18-month-old that and another one on the way. And so I'm getting ready to kind of embark on the journey of chaos with multiple children and also be working. And so I definitely feel a lot of responsibility to share my voice. And I also think a big thing is, especially we have a pretty diverse leadership team, but it is still primarily male dominated for sure. But I think that, Lindsey and I think we do work in a really great environment. I feel like we're really privileged in that sense, but I think it's also leading by example, right? If I can be really empathetic with my team and people under me that need flexibility, that have children, that maybe it's not even children, maybe they have elders like their mother or their father that they're taking care of. If I can lead by example and allow them the flexibility to still do what they need to do and be successful in their role, and at the end of the day, I'm successful and I have a successful team, I think that carries a lot of weight with kind of being able to resonate with other folks that may not be super bought into this great like flexibility type of environment. And as long as we can prove that it can be successful and you can manage your folks effectively while still being a certain degree of empathetic, I think that's really critical. And also just being kind of an advocate and an ear to my fellow women colleagues and allowing them to voice some of their challenges to me and use me as sort of the conduit to help get their voice elevated to higher levels in the organization is super important. And I think that we all, whether we like to admit it or not, we do carry that responsibility. And so I think we all need to understand that we have to advocate for everybody, including ourselves.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you just said there, Alisha. I think you're right on point. It all comes down to leadership. And if leaders are demonstrating the kinds of behaviors that are going to support more family-friendly environments, then the people below them will recognize, oh, it's okay if I do that. One example is if you're at the top of the house and you take, off early in order to go to a soccer game, post-pandemic, and people actually see you leaving, then it creates the environment where it's like, okay, well, if a VP or the CEO is doing it, then hopefully it's okay for me to do it too. And by leading by example in the kinds of behaviors that will support the kinds of family-friendly environments going forward, I think it's going to go a long way in terms of creating the work-life balance and the kind of culture that a lot of employees are going to be looking for going forward.
I'll just say too, just as like a closing comment on this, is I do think that this remote environment has created much more awareness and just humanized people a lot more than pre-COVID when everybody was in the workplace. Because as early on, myself included, prior to COVID, rarely did we ever actually do Zoom with video, right? It was kind of like, I'm going to keep my video off. But now it's such a norm to have your video on all the time. The downfall or the challenge to that is, especially early on and still today, there's the challenge of, oh, my toddler is popping in behind me, or my dog's barking in the background, or whatever the case is. And I know early on, employees are like, I'm so sorry, like I'm so embarrassed that happened. But it's like, I love it because I love seeing a glimpse of like into your life that you never really got before. And I mean, you really are seeing different sides of people. Like you're seeing into their home. I mean, I have a background on right now, but like you're seeing into their home and you're kind of getting a totally different perspective on your team than what you really ever got exposed to before. So I think that has helped the situation, I think, because it's just kind of grounded people a little bit more. And it's like, it's in your face that, hey, don't forget, everybody has a family and has a life outside of work. And so I actually think that the remote environment has helped kind of level some people down on that front that maybe weren't, didn't necessarily, not that they didn't understand that people had lives, but they just never got that perspective of it.
There's nothing more freeing when I'm on an interview and I'm on the phone at home than when a source says like, oh, I have a 2-year-old, so you might hear something in the background. I'm like, I have an 18-month-old, like you're definitely gonna hear something, but you can just feel like the relief on the other side of that like line just like die away. Like we all have toddlers. It's gonna be okay. Okay, so we do have some questions, and I think that we touched on this a little bit, but just if anyone has any thoughts, this person has written, as a woman in the workforce, I've always been hesitant to say that I need to take time away to take care of my family because I think it could be viewed as unprofessional. Do you see this changing? Is it going to be quote unquote okay in the future to be open about your commitments outside of work? And this was something that I really struggled with actually during the pandemic because as a news editor, like there's no worse time to take a week of vacation than in the middle of a global pandemic with like an election looming. But how have you navigated this? Anyone have any thoughts?
You know, I think Lauren definitely nailed it. It comes from the top. I definitely have that guilt complex. I was raised by a mother who worked 100 hours a week. She was a VP for a well-known bank. Like my image of work was a workaholic mother who was never, ever available to me. And so I struggle with that. And it has to be viewed as if I struggle with that, so do other people. I still struggle with that. I had to leave for a dentist appointment yesterday, and I had to decide if I was going to cancel out of a meeting for it. And I did, you know, and it was met with kindness and respect of, yeah, absolutely, you have to take care of that. So I think as the employee, being really transparent and just setting the stage of, hey, I really need to do this. There are very few times that I've done that where it's been met with, well, why? Because when it's realistic and it's asked for out of the expectation of this is the only time, I mean, especially a doctor's appointment, especially a sick child, especially things that are medical, you know, it's unless you're willing to go to an urgent care or an emergency room in the middle of a pandemic, you need those appointments during normal office hours. But swallowing the guilt and recognizing you probably work hard enough at what you do, and you're probably efficient enough at what you do, that an hour is not going to make you look unprofessional. It's going to make you look human. It's going to make you look committed, and it's going to make you look even better, because if you can balance your work life and still be super successful at both, the honor and the praise and the accolades are going to come twofold, tenfold, sevenfold. Throw a number at it. You look stronger as a realistic human working in an environment, whether you're male or female, to be able to support both. And I think if the expectation is that you shouldn't, then perhaps you are not with the right company.
Yeah, I would agree too. And even if it's beyond like dentist appointments and childcare, right? Like I think mental health is really important. And I think that you know, this remote environment, while it's wonderful in so many ways because you have a whole new level of flexibility, like I for one was like really getting bad like cabin fever, especially early on in COVID when like really like everybody was in true lockdown. I mean, I was climbing up the walls. And so, you know, just being able to take that time off to like disconnect and recharge, you are so much more effective and productive and thrive in your workplace when you're feeling good and you're back at a good mental place than when you're kind of on that verge of just mental exhaustion and you're just burnt out, right? And so I do think a lot more folks are recognizing and being aware that this is really important, and they need to promote that with their teams, that you get more out of your team if they're like recharged and if they're feeling good, and if they're kind of at a point where they're exhausted and mentally drained, like we should almost be encouraging them to take some time away, because we know that we'll get, you know, they'll just be in a better place and they'll be more productive at the end of the day if they do take that time. So I think mental health is a super, super important thing, especially in the instance of COVID and the dynamics that's facilitated.
Yeah, that's going to need to be a pivot. Oh, go ahead, Lindsey, you're good.
All right. One thing I would just add to that would be that work is not 8 to 5 anymore. I think, you know, we're working somewhat round the clock because it's always on. Our computer is always in front of us, and we don't have to go to an office anymore. So taking that hour that you need to tend to your family or tend to your physical, mental health is super important. So just advocate for yourself, because in the end, you're going to be a better employee for it too.
Yeah, what I was going to add on is, at least certainly for big businesses, they're going to have to look at that as an opportunity and an option for their team members and employees. We have something amazing at Lifetime called a wellness talk. We have 5 counselors on staff, and you can schedule with them for free once every week, once every 2 weeks, whatever that looks like for you. And that's one of the perks. You know, you can talk to somebody. You are not alone. And it's more than just a helpline. If you need to talk to somebody, it's literally a Zoom meeting with a counselor, just to have a third party to talk to. And it's highly encouraged, and it is, you know, the anonymity is kept. So that's going to be a point to Alicia's previous point of differentiation between big companies. Is that something that's viewed as a positive thing to do, or is that not talked about?
I've heard of companies rolling out sort of like free mental health care, whether it's like a Zoom with a counselor or other things during this time. I think that's amazing. Like, what a change from even like a year ago. I couldn't see companies doing that. So another perk of the situation we're in, sort of. I love this next question. How are you encouraging / keeping up morale in the workplace? We typically hold recognition events. Those are all canceled. We're now struggling to find creative ways to recognize staff and build morale. Anyone have any examples?
The best way to help with morale in an organization right now is just keep the lines of communication open and make a lot of effort to connect with people, especially at a leadership level. If you were to look back 10 months ago, there was so much uncertainty. You know, the opportunity to just keep people in the loop. And now people have kind of gotten used to it. It's a little bit more business as usual, but it's a new year. What's going to happen as the vaccine rolls out? How are we going to be going back to the office? What's going to happen with business travel going forward? So there's a lot. The best thing I think a leader can do right now, over and above, you know, the rah-rah kind of stuff, is to have authentic communication and make sure it's two-way. So not only communicate what's going on and what people can expect and help set expectation, but also make sure that you're listening, you're hearing what's on people's minds, what's working, what's not working, and what their fears are around the situation. Because, you know, again, people are looking to be heard. And as we come out of this, you know, people are going to be, right now, people are sitting tight. If they have a job, there's a lot of people that, you know, are just wanting to say, how can I stay as secure as possible? But when things improve in the economy, I have definite opinions about whether this company's been good to me during this period or not. And if you're not feeling awesome about what's transpired over the last year, then I anticipate there will be quite a bit of shift. And in our work in the career development world, I'm talking to a lot of women actually in the last year who have taken this time to say, you know, the pandemic, the pause that we're in, the slower pace of, you know, just not the business travel, not the you know, evening events and things like that, it's caused me to really reprioritize. And I want to make sure that going forward, I am very clear about what I'm looking for, and that I am in an organization that's going to align with that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Amanda. I was just going to say too, I think it's really important to to exactly Lauren's point around keeping everybody informed and keeping the lines of communication open. But I think it's also you know, I have a lot of one-on-ones directly with a lot of the folks that report to me. And honestly, there are times where half of our one-on-one is spent talking about not work-related things. And I think that that's really important because I share, I try to be somewhat vulnerable with them and being honest about how I'm feeling personally. And I think that kind of creates a little bit more of a level playing field for them to feel that they can be open with me. But I think that's really important because going back to my earlier point around mental health, just asking people like, how are you really doing, you know, like outside of work, you know, like how are you feeling about things? And you know, I think that there's always just been this very like work personal life divide that's always existed between like leadership and team members under them. And I think that we have to break down that barrier in like a really great cultural environment to where, I mean, yeah, not everybody I will say is necessarily like friends, but I mean, I feel privileged that I do call a lot of the folks that I work with friends. And I think that having a relationship like that where, and especially with like social media and everything, right? Like, you know, so much more about people's lives than you ever did before. And like, just kind of drawing awareness of, hey, I saw that you like were with your family this weekend. That looked so fun. And, you know, just having an opportunity that people feel that you actually care about them, I think is really important.
Yeah, no longer is hearing enough. There's definitely needs to be a response for sure. You know, a lot of my one-on-ones are spent with professional stuff. What are your goals? What are your aspirations? What are your best practices that I can share? So highlighting their best practices and really elevating them to the level that everybody is seeing them. And not just that, but like what for us, we call it our healthy way of life. What are your healthy way of life goals? And how do I support you in that? If it's being more present for your family, when do you want me to not contact you? Not send you that text. If it's trying to get to a yoga class, great. Let's look at your schedule and see where we can fit that in. How can I support you in that? You know, it's the listening and now responding to, you are a person first and foremost, and a team member employee second. So how do we enrich that for you so that you can feel better about this? The response is, you know, to the point of the world right now, great, we can hear it, but what is the active response in fill in the blank? It's going to be the most important differentiator.
So that bleeds, we're almost out of time here, but I want to do one more quick question. Someone asked, I think this is really important. Speaking of working continuously during the pandemic, how do you personally manage your time balancing children, work, mental health? Anna, you mentioned asking people when they don't want to be contacted, which I think is a really great example. Anyone else have sort of like real life examples that they could share?
I was going to say, one thing that I've recently started doing is I just block out time on my calendar. I mean, I just literally, because now, at least my particular work environment, like everything revolves around people's calendar availability, right, within Outlook. And so I just block out time on my calendar. If I know I need, you know, personal time, or I need to leave work by a certain time to be able to make dinner or be able to pick up my son, I have to kind of like draw that line on my calendar. And that's really helped kind of enable me to be a little bit more successful in that. I would love to say that I've mastered the whole work-life balance thing. I don't know that anybody has perfectly mastered that. I think it's always a continuous improvement thing, but I think that the remote environment has created more flexibility because, hey, maybe you do have to leave early today, but that doesn't mean that after my children go to bed tonight, I can't jump back on for another hour or two and finish up something that I had started prior in the day. So I would just say taking control of your calendar is really important to help enable you to be successful. Otherwise, I know myself and it just gets away from me. And before you know it, it's 6:30 and I haven't shut it down yet. And dinner's done and I'm the last one at the table. So
That's great.
And one thing for me is the first time in my career I've been able to pick up my kids from school, which is a really big deal for a 3, 4, and 7-year-old to see their mom at the pickup line. And so I have tried to make a really good effort of blocking that 15 minutes just to go down the road and pick them up and ask them about their day. So then I can feel that nice balance of I can get back online, but I've had that moment with my kids to check in and be present for them.
That's great. I think that's a really nice note to end on. So 2021, we are leading with empathy and we are taking control of our calendars. They're our 2021 intentions. We just set them. So thank you all for being here today. I so appreciate it. And this was a great conversation. Any final thoughts before we close out?
I talked about it this week in class. when you feel like you hear people saying we're all just doing our best, you have to believe it for yourself too. I hear that a lot. I know you're doing your best, and I think, but there's always more. Like, I could be doing more. Instead, we just need to invest in our future selves and say thank you and know that today you did your best and tomorrow you're going to do your best too.
Great. Well, thank you again, everyone. And have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye.